Okay.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hello, Jackie. How are you?
Good. I was thinking about you last night. I know we have a lot to talk about, but since you're such a foodie,
I am a foodie.
There was an event in honor of my mother, Lydia Shire, the chef.
Yes.
At the James...
The celebrity chef, let's not.
At the James Beard Foundation last night, which is a townhouse in Lower Manhattan. And there was this amazing menu, and I wanted to share, the highlight for me was the charcoal prime aged beef rib with porcini salt, popover, gorgonzola dolce, and shaved white truffle. Anything with shaved white truffle is pretty good.
I also have a big gorgonzola thing.
Gorgonzola. Yeah,
it's my favorite cheese.
It's good. Anyway, there was tons of like halibut. There was a lot of stuff, but it was all good. Anyway, Nantucket Bay scallops this time of year, starting in November into December, you can get them. The little tiny sweet ones, not to be confused with the other type of bay scallops masquerading as scallops. But anyway, if you're not from New England, you can't maybe appreciate them, but they're amazing.
That sounds lovely.
It was fun. So we have a lot to talk about, and
we do.
The thing we decided to start with is this book that you and I are both loving.
Yep, Curveball.
The Bob Drogan book, amazing. Have you finished it?
Oh yeah, I did nothing else for a day and a half.
Right, me too.
I mean, we should tell people it's a book about Curveball, who was the sole source behind the mobile biological weapons laboratories that featured very prominently in Colin Powell's case on the what we now know are fictional Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, and it's an amazing account of how one piece of intelligence could go so wrong. I mean, it's a book dedicated to one piece of intelligence, and it's remarkable.
And he obviously has cooperation from all the right people. And
oh, yes.
One thing I learned that didn't make my list of my top 6 favorite things about the book, but one thing I learned, and I'll just say briefly, I had not realized how horrible relations were between the German BND, which is the equivalent of their CIA, and the CIA, going back to the immediate post-World War II era. I had no idea that relations were... And that definitely laid sort of the foundation for how things kind of went wrong later. But that was really interesting.
Well, I mean, I was just totally amazed because, we so often rely on foreign intelligence sources and, the laptop of death that's floating around.
Which actually has a German intelligence connection.
Bingo, right? And so, I'm reading this book, and it's like curveball, 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 but I'm thinking laptop of death. Like, if these guys are this bad...
But they weren't that bad. It wasn't that they were that bad. Because there were repeated... Okay. I'll start with one of my favorite things about the book, because I have a middle schooler who's a good math student. CIA agents, it turns out, can't do middle school math. And by the way, not CIA agents, it's CIA analysts, because in this story we learn that the DO, the operatives, the undercover people, they're the heroes, and the kind of the gang who couldn't shoot straight or can't do math are the people in WinPack, which is the shop in the CIA full of the analysts, the geek squad that crunch the numbers. And so I was thinking that what we need maybe is a new algebra curriculum with word problems, because this really comes down to word problems, involving things like fermenter capacity, how much anthrax slurry or VW slurry do you need to fill a fermenter, and how much time would it create enough to fill a warhead? I mean, it was really basic math that they just weren't doing. That, and they weren't doing basic photographic interpretation. From 1997 onward, they knew there was a berm around 3 sides of this building that trucks could not get in and through to the other side of.
Well, I'll tell you what, that was the most shocking part of the whole thing for me. I knew all of those pieces, but I hadn't put them together quite this way. I mean, we had this claim, right, that the Iraqis were using this warehouse to make biological weapons. The trucks would drive in and then drive out. And this was the central piece of Curveball, the sole source on the mobile BW reporting, the central piece of his account. And in the lead up to the war, when we're trying to verify that there are no weapons of mass destruction, the IAEA goes to the site and checks it out. And apparently that had no impact whatsoever.
And not only checks it out, but did an amazingly thorough, careful job. Documented every step of the way. Zero impact.
I mean, it was so frustrating, right? Because, on the one hand, political people are saying, oh, we're making every effort we can to avoid war, and Saddam's not cooperating. And yet the inspectors are chasing down the specific leads that are at the basis of the cause of the war, and they're turning out to be false. But that information isn't coming back into our system and causing people to go, oh, maybe we're idiots.
Well, at every step of the... Well, okay, one other scene that I loved in the book. There's been a huge fight between the DO people and the DI people, the operatives and the intel analysts.
Right.
And to the point where this one woman says to her colleague in the analytical side, you can kiss my ass in Macy's window. I mean, it's a big fight. It's been elevated to senior levels of the agency. And yet when Powell goes over to the CIA and plants himself there for a few days to work on his presentation to the Security Council, Tennant says unequivocally, unambiguously, it's all true. I mean, completely disregards that there has just been this giant fight, which lots of people are aware of. Anyway, that was... So, Tennant is clearly sort of the villain in this story. And
well, he and Beth, the WinPack bio person who, I mean, Drogon is not going to be on her Christmas card list after
And
this
then
one.
in what I thought was the lamest ever bureaucratic defense of bad analysis, this line, the CIA, after it all is said and done, and the CIA is sort of asked to explain, why didn't you tell Powell that there was this giant argument about the curveball information? The CIA analyst says, we lost the thread of concern. We lost the thread of concern. I mean, I'm wondering whether I could try to use that on my husband to any... I'm going to file it away, and I'll report back on whether... But we lost the thread of concern. It just didn't... wow, that was all I could say.
Yeah.
And then here's the other thing. Oh, there were two other interesting things. The best scene, I thought, that Drogon describes in the book is this sort of stunned silence in the German BND when they've all kind of gathered around to watch Powell give his speech, and they're just aghast because they see up on the screen their mobile labs. And since 2001, they have repeatedly been warning the CIA that this guy's unreliable, unverified, etc. And they're just they immediately get on the phone and say, "What? That was are you crazy? What part of unreliable and unverified do you not understand?"
See, I thought it was more ambivalent than
really?
that the BND was, I mean, they were putting in the caveat saying that the information hasn't been verified and that there are concerns about the reporting, but they didn't really, I mean, they didn't give the CIA access to the guy, in part because they knew that he would be seen as not credible, right, and that would harm their reputation. So, I mean, they put the caveats in, but, I mean...
Okay, page 160. After the speech, the BND group sat in uneasy silence. What the hell is going on? Capel asked his colleagues. No one had an answer. Right. They call Tyler Drumheller. They say, you're right. No, I mean, I take your point because the big problem, of course, is the CIA didn't have access to him. But, and there were times when they pushed to get access, but you think that there was the doctor who went in to take blood from him who, noticed that he was hungover. Look, this was just a screw up all around. There's no question about it. But I think.
Well, we're the ones who went to war, so it's on us.
It's on us. But the Germans did warn. The Germans did put it in writing that they had concerns about this guy, and they did it early. Early in 2001, before.
I guess that's true. And there's a great paragraph where there's a discussion of the U.S. analyst who sees that the English translations were softening the caveats.
Yes, right, absolutely.
Which I thought fascinating, right? The caveats are in German, and they come out in English, and they're much less alarming.
And then the cool part of this detective story, which I appreciated because I'm always saying over and over again, it's all in the UN reports, just read the UN reports. Mm-hmm. It turns out that this guy, while he was being debriefed by the Germans, at night he'd go to internet cafes, and was reading old UN reports and getting the information from them to feed to them the next day. So it was this echo chamber, and it was Hamish Killip, a hero of mine, whom I remember fondly from the UN, a British biological weapons expert, who pieced that together, who when he finally read the whole Curveball file, over when he was in Iraq as part of the Iraq Survey Group, finally said, okay, now I'm getting it. It's all kind of, it sounds familiar. This is all the stuff that was in the UNSCOM reports in the late 90s that he would have had access to from Germany. Anyway.
I was surprised that one could write an entire book about Curveball, but I finished that book wanting more. I could argue with you about this book all day.
Right.
It's
awesome. It is like you. I didn't expect there was that much more I could have learned about this. But and then the saddest part of the story was the WinPack analyst who went over to Baghdad after the war. Jerry came home, determined to set things right, to go back to people and say, look, we had it all wrong and here's why, let's fix it. And then the guy's marginalized and pushed out. That is really, truly a tragedy, among others.
It's a rough town.
But, anyway. So, with this ringing endorsement, I'm thinking, well, we should check the Amazon rankings of the Curveball book.
Well, I also linked to it on the blog after the 60 Minutes episode that identified the guy's name and showed a picture of him dancing. Right. Yeah, that was pretty awesome.
That was
Curveball getting down.
Do we know why wasn't Bob Drogan part of the 60 Minutes story though?
Well, I mean, you spent more time in journalist circles than I did, but I get the sense that journalists are detrimentally competitive.
They are.
I mean, it's this weird scoop-breaking competitiveness that leads... I mean, to me, as an analyst, it's odd because you want to share information and compile it. And so to sort of hold the little nugget you have in order to dole it out in sort of these consumable news-sized bites with a whole bunch of filler around it. Fully recognizing that people like me are the filler, right? What does this mean?
Well, 60 Minutes claimed that it had been working on its story for 2 years, and I know Bob Drogan presumably has been working on his book for at least that amount of time. So, understandably, but it just seemed a little odd to me. It sort of seemed like there was so much more color he could have lent to that story.
Right.
Anyway, moving right along. Should we talk about Iran next? There's news.
Excellent article, Jackie.
Thank you. A Witch's Brew.
Those of you... Oh,
a Witch's Brew. I can't take credit for the title. That was Miles Pomper's title.
I'm not a title fan, generally. I don't know. All my titles would be 40 words long and very specific.
It's hard. It's hard to come up with a new way. We didn't... Like, the one title I really wanted to avoid was Timeline to a Bomb. I hate those Iran nuke articles that are all about this one issue, which I think is sort of not the central question. So, and
we should tell people what you wrote. Do you want to tell them, or do you want to see if I actually read it?
No, either we can both muddle through it. I'll start and you can fill in.
Okay.
David Albright and I published an article in the current issue of Arms Control Today, which really attempts to put together all the important variables of the Iran centrifuge enrichment program. Really just looking at that, not looking at heavy water reactors at Arak. We were just trying to examine things like uranium hexafluoride production and consumption. How many centrifuges does Iran have the parts to make on its own without importing additional materials? How well are the centrifuges that it has installed so far actually operating, given the limited information we have? So we tried to kind of cobble together this massive information and cough up a reasonable guesstimate about how well they're doing. And our bottom line is, which hasn't changed really over the last year, they're muddling through, but they're getting a little bit better every day. Or, every month. They're getting a little bit better, a little bit maybe more confident in their cascade operations. And we're about to, I think, take a big leap forward in our understanding of what they've accomplished, because with this IAEA report that's coming out, I believe late next week, we'll see, possibly for the first time, whether Iran has operated all 3,000 centrifuges with uranium hexafluoride. And it's really sort of the next IAEA report that's going to give us, that sort of on a sustained basis. But we'll at least see, have they reached this benchmark? And
it should have the first correct me if I'm wrong, but the first tranche of questions under the
work plan.
Much maligned
The
work plan.
Yeah, which you didn't have a problem with as much, but
it's their job.
I know, but the work plan. So so we wrote this article and we basically said they're getting a little bit better all the time, and if they keep it up in this kind of imperfect, muddling through way, eventually they'll accumulate a substantial quantity of low-enriched uranium. And what we call for in the paper is that as a confidence-building measure and as a signal to the world that its intentions are purely peaceful, Iran should blend down its LEU, its low-enriched uranium, so that there's no question about its intentions about stockpiling LEU, maybe for a breakout capability later. So that's really the message that I would hope people would take away, that there is this thing Iran could do that might be a positive step.
And I think that's a great confidence-building measure, by the way.
Blending down, right? But I'm surprised it hasn't.
Or
been
shipping it out of the country,
right.
or
well, they're not going to agree to ship it out of the country.
No, I know, but
blending it down would be good. And I'm surprised that I haven't seen that in anyone else's talking points. I'm trying to start. You know how if you start a rumor and see if it comes back to you. I'm trying to sort of now plant this seed about the blending down LEU and see if it maybe comes up in the next Security Council deliberations. Or
that would be great.
That'd be cool. So the big news is a report coming out in a little over a week, and we'll find out where Iran stands with. The thing they're supposed to be coming clean with the IAEA on their P2 centrifuge program,
and that's what I want.
Yeah. Okay. So what's your feeling about that?
My only complaint about the article, the one place that we disagree, is in the conclusion. You make it very clear that you all are still very serious about some zero centrifuge option.
Right.
But I actually think your article has the best argument for something more than zero centrifuges, which is your very careful discussion of the roots of the P2 program and the limits of our ability, or the IAEA's ability, to monitor activity in Iran without the additional protocol. I think that if Iran showed up at the Security Council tomorrow or said to the IAEA, you know what, we give up, we're going to go to zero. And since we're going to zero, by the way, we don't have to implement the additional protocol. I would not consider the matter resolved. I would still be really quite worried about a clandestine program, which causes me this sort of worry that we spend all our time trying to get the number of centrifuges down, and that's only one half of the problem. The other problem is getting monitoring way up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you make. I think that is a seriously important issue. If Iran says tomorrow, Uncle, we're dismantling all the centrifuges, and by the way, forget about that additional protocol, that would be a problem. But the other problem is if they say, if we persuade Iran to cap its program at 1,500 or 3,000 centrifuges, then and then without also stepped up monitoring, we also would have no way of knowing whether there is a hidden program somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. I just, I had too many economics classes, but, I always look at these things as kind of economics indifference curves, your willingness to trade one good for another. And if you told me that I could have the additional protocol and Iran having 164 centrifuges, I would take that over no additional protocol and no centrifuges. So, I'm not as wedded to the idea of zero, because I'm much more worried about knowing what the Iranians are doing than I am.
I think that, it's possible that David and I could be persuaded to fall off the zero insistence if there were really another viable alternative that made the... And I just don't think anyone's kind of come up with that magic solution yet. Right. And I think that's the hesitation about sort of...
That's a good argument.
But anyway, but, you raise a really interesting thing about the decision, the decision matrix and the sort of what Iran's cost-benefit calculus is, because there was a rumor about 2 weeks ago when Putin went to Tehran and he met with Khamenei, right? I think it was.
Yep. Well, I shouldn't say that so assertively. I think that's right.
He went over Ahmadinejad's head, and the rumor was that he was offering a deal, and the deal was something along the lines of, we'll fuel Bushehr for you, we'll call off the dogs in the Security Council, but you have to suspend enrichment and accept the additional protocol. And I thought that if I were Iran, I would have really thought hard about taking that deal. Bushehr has a lot of symbolic importance in it, almost as much symbolic importance as their centrifuges, if not more, in some ways, because it's a physical, it's actually a reactor. So sort of for a day, I thought, oh, they're going to take that deal, and our whole article will be moot.
That's interesting. See, I guess I'm much more pessimistic. I mean, if I'm the Iranians, I would calculate at this point that I don't have to do anything, that I can have my centrifuges, that the United States is incompetent enough diplomatically these days and sort of drained enough that we don't have that much going for us. I would consider the risk of an airstrike pretty negligible, probably wouldn't, certainly wouldn't threaten the regime, probably wouldn't set the nuclear program back all that much. I mean, if I were the Iranians, I'd build the bomb.
Oh no! I agree. The wind is at their back. They're happy. They're sitting. They're in a really good spot.
I mean, maybe if I got some sweetheart deal, I'd think about it.
But don't you think that's kind of a sweetheart deal? Russia's been slow rolling, fueling Bushehr for a very long time. Compared
to a nuclear bomb, or at least the capability, I should say. I don't think that they've made a decision.
No.
By the way, I'm imagining that if I were Iran, right, a nation of, some large number, more than, tens of millions? Is it more than 100 million people? I have no idea the population.
I want to say 80 million, but I could be wrong. I can try to Google it right now.
Oh, that seems plausible to me. Anyway. So, it was a really good article, and I thought the calculations were extremely helpful, and I thought the discussion of the risks of breakout if they have a stockpile of low-enriched uranium was really, really cool, and I thought the discussion of the need for enhanced monitoring and the possibility of a clandestine facility was quite adroit.
Wow, I was nervous about this. I was nervous about our discussion because I was worried about the your reaction to this article. But the other thing.
Well, I think zero.
Yeah, zero.
Bad,
I know you don't like the zero thing.
It just seems.
It just seems
unnecessarily.
It's inflexible.
Right. And I mean, we had this argument back, a year and a half ago when we were trying to figure out what does suspension mean.
Right.
Right? Like, what if the Iranians decided that they would say they suspended because they would spin the centrifuges but not run hot gas through them, right? Or not hot gas, not run the UF6 through them and enrich. And I mean, at the time, the argument was like, well, right, if you don't get suspension at all, I mean, that's the worst of all worlds, right?
Right.
Even if it's not the optimal type of suspension. And I feel like that's the same disagreement we're having about the numbers. It's just...
there's another thing I didn't know. Did you know that Brazil is often mentioned as sort of the counterpart to Iran? Brazil has a centrifuge program.
Right.
Brazil is not an adherent to the additional protocol. I did not know this until recently.
I did not know that.
And it turns out that Brazil's reason for not adhering to the AP is that the declared nuclear states haven't made enough progress as they're committed to under the NPT toward nuclear disarmament. Is that Article 6 or Article 4? Article 6.
Yeah.
So because of this Article 6 reason, Brazil is saying no to the additional protocol. And I've never heard Iran mention that, but I always thought that. I've thought recently that would be a good talking point for them to throw up in people's faces.
We probably should help them. I mean, they're doing all right all by themselves.
Okay, but did you happen to read Bolton's op-ed on Iran? It appeared yesterday in the Washington in the New York Post, which I read on the train into the city.
I haven't read it. I also don't have the book. Is it out yet?
surrender is not an option. Defending America at the United Nations and abroad is being published today. Okay, so I guess it's out.
Today. Okay.
Yesterday.
I looked in one of the bookstore windows, but I didn't see the bushy walrus mustache glaring at me with a flinty-eyed hatred.
I mean, he writes this op-ed. The first 2/3 of it is, Bolton typical, and you can sort of agree or not agree, but follow along. Yes, diplomats are dithering, and the options not that good. But then he says, it just a bolt out of the blue: regime change in Iran is the preferred option. Yikes! Is he crazy? There is no indication, by the way, population of Iran 65 million. No indication that Iranians are, waiting for the signal to rise up.
Right.
What is he reading? Anyway, it was just bizarre.
I'll tell you what, I'll support it if he goes in first.
Right. Yeah.
We'll have the United States right behind him.
Right. With our broken army, with no more armored personnel carrier. Apparently the vast majority of the armored vehicles in the U.S. military have now reached the end of their lifespans after 5 years of service in Iraq. So I don't know what army we're supposed to go invading.
I confess I haven't been following those particular issues as closely as I did, but my first job in Washington was working for 2 Republicans on a study of we worked on a lot of studies, but one of the things they were working on was the what they called averting a defense train wreck. Right? And it was all about this question of, are we spending enough to invest in the force at the same time that the tempo of operations has grown so great that we're consuming, right?
Right.
You're using up equipment and you're stressing people. And, it was a really sensible argument. They wanted to set defense spending about 3 times higher than it was, and I wasn't crazy about that. But, the framework of it was I thought, absolutely right on. And it's just insanity to me that something that I had associated as being a virtue of this, what I had anticipated would be a virtue of this particular administration, this focus on investing in the forces, has become probably their biggest failure.
Right. Well, that's
my rant.
That's a reasonable rant. The other point we tried to make in the paper, we just separated it out, sidebar about why there's no real military option, and without trying to do what people who are really expert in this area can do much better, but just trying to point out why the survivability of Iran's nuclear program would probably be middling to high in the event, because we just simply don't know where all the sites and facilities are. And anyway, so they're really... You
know who, by the way, makes that argument really well is Michael Eisenstadt at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
He makes the argument that there's no good military option.
Yeah, what he did was... it had always been kind of a pet peeve of mine that people who are like, oh, there's a secret program, we don't know everything, we have to bomb them. That those two things are actually contradictory statements, right? If there is a secret program, then we don't know where to bomb it. And he's one of the few people I've seen say, that he's more hawkish about Iran than I am in that sense, that he's much more worried about a secret program, but then he's in some ways more dovish precisely because he doesn't quite know what to hit.
Right.
But he was a military planner, so he's actually concerned with the practicalities as opposed to some of our blowhard colleagues.
Well, John Bolton says, absent regime change, the targeted use of force against Iran's program is the only option left. The only option left. We have to get him in touch with Mr. Eisenstadt and see if...
yes, exactly.
Okay, so we want to talk also about you want to talk about North Korea. And
I do, but so you can't see this because you can't, but you'll be able to watch it later. I wore a special shirt for you today. It is my Kim Jong-il Get Ill t-shirt.
Wow. Did you have that specially made?
No, I bought it from The Onion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they have a collection of witty t-shirts, and I had refrained from buying any of them until I saw it Get Ill, and I had to own it.
That is really good. Now, I would dare you to wear that to...
I'm wearing it to work, and I have to say, this is not appropriate workplace attire at the New America Foundation.
Why is that?
We're a slacks and collared shirt kind of place. Yeah, no jeans, no t-shirts.
Is that really stated, dress code?
I don't know that I don't know that we have it written down, but that's the culture.
Interesting.
So
it's not a .com startup kind of vibe. You're not like the think tank startup.
Well, I think early on we were sort of young and interesting, and I think they were a little afraid that maybe if we were too hip, right, that people wouldn't take us seriously. So
okay.
Now, though, we're reasonably established. So as far as I'm concerned, I should be able to come to work in cutoffs and a
okay. So you've got your Get Ill T-shirt on.
But what this doesn't address is what we're doing to disable that darned reactor and the other facilities. I don't know. Have you gotten... Well, I should say for viewers at home. The United States has this agreement with the North Koreans that they're going to disable, which is a special made-up word, the nuclear reactor at Yongbyon, some of the other reactors that were under construction, the reprocessing facility, and the fuel fabrication facility.
Yes.
5, right? And there are technical measures that started this week to do that, and the United States won't say what they are.
Right.
Which is kind of annoying, and I can't get anyone to tell me. Apparently, they're waiting for the Chinese to announce it.
So what's our suspicion? Is our suspicion that the North Koreans are not taking is the concern that they're taking measures that could be easily reversible? I mean, is that your concern? That they're not, that whatever steps they're taking, they're just not going to be deep and,
My principal concern is pedantic. I just want to know. But my secondary concern is, I think Chris Hill is doing a heck of a job. And I think that he's got in place probably the best agreement that he could have in place. And I think it's better than no agreement. But I'd like to know how long it would take North Korea to reverse the measures. And at this point, the State Department just says a substantial amount of time. We heard this idea kicked around that it was about a year, but I'd like to know what the measures actually are so that one could produce an estimate, like if this deal falls apart, as deals have been known to do, right, what is the time between the collapse of the deal and Yongbyon pumping out plutonium again?
Well, would it be possible for us to describe, and I'm not sure it would be possible for me to describe, so I'm asking you, I guess, what types of measures they could take to, there are papers floating out there that do describe sort of short-term measures to dismantle a reactor or a reprocessing facility and long-term measures. And
I just put a post up on the blog, armscontrolwonk.com, where I talked about this. The only thing I've seen from a State Department official is he used the word cutting, which relates to a paper that I posted on my website that I got through various means from DOE, where there are these control rods that you lower into the pile and you pull out in order to control the reaction. And so you can cut the chains. I'm gesturing off camera, but no one can see that. You cut the chains and drop the rods in, and that basically absorbs.
But that's sort of an impermanent disablement.
Right. You'd have to, put on a spacesuit or just be North Korean and not care about these things.
Occupational safety and health. Yeah.
Right. Go in and reconnect the chains and yank them up.
Yeah.
I actually don't know how they would do that. I'm probably saying something technically really stupid. I mean, you probably couldn't even do the spacesuit. You might have to do it mechanically. I haven't looked at that. But, that's what I want to know, is what the measures are, so that I can spend a couple weeks talking to people and finding out, okay, well, how would you do it, right? Rather than just shooting my mouth off.
Right. Well, I think that that's really reasonable, and
But it's important to say that they're doing it, and it's starting, and that this is something that will come down the pike.
Right. Well, I guess that brings us a little bit. The issue with North Korea was Chris Hill's done this great job have the North Koreans been doing anything with any other countries that maybe raise concerns about their commitment to their new non-proliferation status? And that brings us to Syria. And so should we back up and I don't have the exact dateline firm. I think just to back up and explain from the beginning, I think it was on September 6th, Israeli warplanes launched and targeted a site in Syria along the Euphrates River.
That seems right to me.
Near the
early
border
September
with Turkey, and took out a building. And about a week later, that was revealed in the public. It was written about. Some wires picked it up. And I may not be giving credit to the paper, to whoever broke the story, but
yeah. Strikely,
I think it was like in the teens, September 13th, something like that. Then there was sort of this mad dash to find imagery of the site before it had been struck. What was there? What was hit? ABC News, Martha Raddatz reported sometime later, my old shop, that according to her sources, Israel had hard and fast, really solid intelligence that this was a nuclear facility, that North Korea had been working with I don't know if Martha reported then that there was North Korean cooperation or if the New York Times did, but somewhere there was the connection made between North Korea and this facility. Right. And according to Martha Raddatz in her story, there had been photos acquired from inside this facility.
Right.
Which led the Israelis to conclude beyond the shadow of a doubt that it needed to be. We should. It would be interesting to talk about like the Israeli decision calculus and why that facility, as opposed to sort of some facilities in Iran that they also know lots about, presumably, and haven't struck. ISIS published imagery of the site before the attack, and you, through lots of help with readers of your blog and your own forensic analysis, you've managed to figure out, I think, that facility was there as of 2001. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's or
you had a date range.
We had a date range, and it's 67 weeks, so it's a little bit more than a year. So it runs sometime in 2001 or 2002, right. I think the thing was constructed.
Yeah. So David Albright and Paul Brannon, whom I work with, published the analysis of this, and I don't want to speak for them, but I think that their analysis advanced the notion that this could be a reactor construction site, but I don't think that anyone knows whether it was an abandoned project, whether it was ongoing. That's what we really don't know. There's just really an absence of information. And now the real question is whether the IAEA is going to seek to inspect the site, even though it's been raised.
Right. I mean, I should say that I thought the two papers now, is it two or three, David and Paul have written?
Yeah, there was a follow-up that showed the site demolished.
Right. I think they were very careful in the way that they presented the information. If I were editing it, I don't think I would have changed anything.
Well, that's good, because I helped edit it.
But the popular interpretation of those papers,
is that they're out a little far on a limb.
Well, the way that they're interpreted is, I think, out too far on a limb.
Yeah.
I mean, like, David sort of and Paul say, well, gee, this box is not unlike this North Korean box in size. Right? So it's clearly big enough.
Now your blog readers, someone on your blog actually measured the box in terms of the height.
That's right.
Was his conclusion that it was similar to Yongbyon in height?
I don't remember now how tall Yongbyon was, but it was very tall. Okay. I mean, it was tall enough that it would be. I thought it would be credible. It was like 24 meters. Okay. I mean, it was actually really hard. I mean, we were trying to find other buildings that were 24 meters tall, and the best we did was the Lego factory. So I've been calling it the box on the Euphrates because I don't want to prejudge and call it a reactor, and other people have been calling it the Syrian Lego factory. But, I thought it was very careful. But the problem, that I see is to say that these two buildings are of similar size. That's pretty thin.
If that's as far as you can go, then that's not very hard.
Right.
But I think the other piece of it are these other little bits and pieces floating around. And hey, maybe they'll add up to nothing. But the other bits and pieces are allegations of North Korean cooperation, allegations of Israeli allegations of, Israel. I really think it's interesting to explore their motive for this, because it's really hard to believe that Syria had an aggressive, advanced program to construct a nuclear reactor that they thought no one was ever going to find out about.
Something that David said, which I thought was quite right, which is, did Syria have the financial and technical wherewithal to complete this project? And he, I think, quite rightly left that as an open question.
And now Syria is a very close, many would argue totalitarian, kind of very, very different from its neighbors in the region in terms of politically how Bashar al-Assad operates. So, it is almost North Korea-like, quote unquote, in its ability to kind of contain and control information. But still, something that's visible from the sky like this, this is a different level of information.
And there's another piece to it, which is something we've really been exploring on the blog, is it is across the river about a mile and a third actually, up the river from a pretty well-known archaeological site that people visit, you can take a tourist trip if you can go to Syria, which, is
hard to do.
Most people in the world, but not us, I think. You can go and you can take pictures. And there are quite a few pictures from that site looking up the river at the entrance to the wadi where the reactor is placed that would have been able to see the pump house. And you can drive, as far as I can tell, up and down that road. So...
Well, I don't know what that proves, though.
Well, one thing that people early on were saying is that the site is remote. Right? And that you wouldn't have a reason to go there other than, you wouldn't just happen upon the place. You'd have to have a reason to go there. But I think that that's not true. It's not necessarily remote. Now, the thing we've been talking about on the blog is that doesn't tell you whether it's a reactor or not, right? Because there are a lot of reactors that are not in remote places. You can see Dimona in Israel from the road.
Right.
But what really struck me about that was one of the pieces of evidence that the official used in Martha Raditz's story. And so it struck me that, look, I think this is a suspicious site, and I would like to have had the IAEA take a look at it before the Israelis hammered it and the Syrians raised it. But it seems like a lot of the intelligence that's used to demonstrate corroboration is kind of like the Curveball case. People have a circumstantial case, and then they're adding little bits of local color to kind of make it more interesting.
Now, how can we explain, and sort of sifting through, there are a lot of other mysterious aspects of this. Why the Israelis...
Yes, it's a very suspicious site.
What's really interesting to me is Syria's ambassador... Normally something like this happens. Your ambassador at the UN goes crazy. They call for meetings, for it to be condemned. Syria's perm rep in New York registered a very quiet complaint, asked for no meetings, made little more than one statement, and then that was it. It was radio silence. Why? And there's been no hue and cry from Syria's neighbors. What explains that?
It could be a whole bunch of stuff. One thing is, if you're the Syrians, you don't want to do battle damage assessment for the Israelis. It's a good reason to raise the facility, actually.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
You don't want the Israelis to know what they hit, who they killed. Mm-hmm. If the Israelis are right and it was a foundation for a reactor and, they someplace had a vessel and they were going to bring the vessel in and put it in and maybe the Israelis were trying to time the strike, you don't want to help the Israelis know that. So, it's good to sort of be quiet, right? Because it makes it harder for the IAEA to get in. It makes it harder for anybody to get in. And certainly was nefarious. I think the Syrians at this point have said it was a military site, right? So, as far as I'm concerned, given our relationship as a country with Syria, any Syrian military site is nefarious, right? and if there were North Koreans there, whether it was for missiles or a nuclear reactor, whatever it was, that would also be nefarious. And so, I can see them being quiet. I want to know what the darn thing was. I just think that analytically we can't say it's a reactor.
And yeah, it's not illegal to build a reactor.
No, and Syria one of the things I've said is Syria quite openly sought a reactor, most recently from the Russians. That was, I wonder, particularly given the age of this site, right, sort of dating back to this 2001, 2002 period.
Right.
You can make the argument that they built the box thinking they were going to get a Russian reactor, and then the Russians cut it off.
That's possible.
And then the box sat empty.
Then why would Israel decide to strike at it?
Maybe then, some North Korean... look,
it's really...
I totally believe it's plausible that the North Koreans would want to sell a reactor.
Or plausible that North Korea would want to offload some stuff.
Actually, I don't buy the offload. Because I think they're going to have to account for stuff. And I think...
But account for stuff that the IEA has no baseline on which to say, oh, you're short, the X number, some maraging steel or whatever. There's very little basis that the IEA has on which to really account for North Korea's...
Well, if it is... we don't know it's a reactor. We don't know what kind of fuel it would use.
You can't underestimate North Korea's determination to monetize its assets, whatever they are. But I agree. We're just really we're getting sort of really ahead of the facts because there's just so little information to work with about.
Sorry, let me go back. I don't underestimate their willingness to monetize. I think the Syrians want to buy a reactor, and I think the North Koreans would sell them a reactor. I just don't think that the motive would be anything other than greed. I don't think it would be offloading assets.
That's fair. But still, then you still come to the point where how did they think they were going to do this without anyone ever noticing?
Right. Well, assuming it's a reactor.
And Syria is a member of the NPT in good standing. Syria has a safeguards relationship. Syria,
right.
It's just it's a little, puzzling any way you look at it. And
well, I see, but I think the Syria thing is more understandable in the sense that they, sought a reactor, we think, from the Russians, and then the Russians wouldn't give it to them.
Okay.
Under U.S. pressure. So if you're the Syrians and you really want a bigger reactor, you know that if it becomes public, the U.S. is going to squeeze you.
Right. Like we've been squeezing them on Bashir.
Right. Well, yeah, everybody's
I guess that just doesn't totally explain it to me too because of Bashir, because Russia's still willing to make deals. Russia's still, but you're right.
Oh, but I thought we knew now that the Russians cut off assistance to the Syrians on the reactor.
Oh, we may know that, but I'm just sort of thinking that would that really stop Russia from, trying again, or Syria, continuing to press for, but again, it's sort of, it's still,
build it and the Russians will sell.
There's no reason for why not transparency? It's just not,
right.
Anyway.
By the way, it's also possible the Israelis made a mistake. It's totally possible the Israelis absolutely believe that this is a reactor, that it was something else, and so they conducted the airstrike because they thought it was a reactor.
I just imagine that for Israel to conduct an airstrike deep into Syrian territory, knowing the possible blowback in multiple ways, Hezbollah, in lots of ways, it would have to be a really carefully considered decision.
Gee, I would have said that about the invasion of Iraq.
About the United States? Yeah, no, we went to war with the army we had.
It's their fault.
Yeah. On that note,
that guy.
Okay, so to be continued. Maybe the next time we talk, we'll know more about the Syria-Israel mystery, and we'll be able to say more about Iran's centrifuges, which is really the big question. What are they doing?
My closing thought on that is you can organize rafting tours down the Euphrates that take you right by the Wadi. So I think whether it's a reactor or a missile site, we need to take some of our grant money and take a vacation in Syria and go rafting.
That would be something. I somehow don't see myself on a whitewater rafting trip, but I'll think about it. All right. Thank you.
It's good to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye.